Um, Welcome to this lecture of anatomy, and today we speak about the skeletal system. Let's jump straight into it. What is the skeletal system? It contains of bones, which are specialized cells, as you know by now, probably, and they are wrapped in connective tissue. So each bone is not just the bone; it's kind of the tissue around it, so it all holds together. And they are not at all like a bad structure that is just like a stick of wood or something to keep it stable. It is very vivid and alive. And yes, it creates a lot of structure, and especially for leverage. So we have more force. But there's also a storage of minerals and production for blood cells, and so it's a crucial living part of the system. It has a supply to nerves, so you can also feel there. And cartilage and ligaments are part of the skeletal system, which I want to explain briefly, and then we look closer at the bones. Cartilage is firm and flexible at the same time. It is also connective tissue and provides support and structure. One example would be the nose. I said that before, but there are many parts of the body which are cartilage. Especially, it helps us to glue things together that still need to be flexible. Yeah, it's a kind of hybrid between something as stable as a bone and as loose as a ligament. We spoke about ligaments before, like dense bands that are strong and connecting bones, but have more flexibility, obviously, than bones itself, and give us the freedom to enable movement while maintaining quite a steady and guided movement. So the knees are a brilliant example because there are like 4 or more bands, ligaments that hold the knee joints together. So those 3 bones, or 4, that are all there and creating movement, but stabilizing that movement so it's not completely lost. Like my shoulder, for example, I have a wide range of movement, which I don't have in my knee. Imagine you would have your shoulder. You know that when you walk on your arms, it's so much more difficult because it's quite less stable than the knee. And the movement is less guided in a sense. So anyway, okay. So the skeletal system has 5 basic functions. It does give us protection. If you look at the skull, the brain is contained in the skull or the rib cage. It gives us a lot of protection from the outside, but also from pressure we use when we move our body or bring us into different shapes. It enables movement. That's when muscles contract. It brings the bones closer, so that is how the muscles can use the leverage. And where 2 bones join together, we call that a joint. And it stores minerals. So in the bones, we have different minerals. And additionally, it creates the red blood cells, which are crucial for life and gives us a whole framework of shape and structure. So then, having a look at the skeleton, we can divide between 2 kinds of skeleton. But actually, I want to look first to the bones itself and to their names. So it would be good to remember the groups, the basic names of the main bones. Again, similar to the muscles, you don't need to know the small ones or all of them, just the gross grouping. And we have a look here in detail. And you can again do the touching and feeling where they are located. Let's start with the anterior view, front. So, skull, yeah, that's our head. And the jaw you have as a separate part. If you speak to your students, you probably better say jaw bone than any Latin specific word. Anyway, then we have the clavicles. The clavicles are those bones here that run from the shoulders to the sternum, the center of the chest, and basically your whole shoulder hangs, so to say, on the clavicles. So the clavicles attach with a little joint here to the sternum. The sternum is the next bone. That is that bony part here at the front of your chest. And here connected are the clavicles. And on the clavicles, as I say, the shoulder blade and the arm completely, the shoulder part is attached. So they're kind of floating there. And they're not being held by a house that is like a brick on brick. Bones are not kind of stuck on top of each other. They are more like free floating in the body and hold together by the fascia or the connective tissues and muscles and ligaments and tendons. Sternum, clavicles. Then we have the ribs and the rib cage, which all join the sternum, and at the backside the spine. And the lower ribs, they just, the lower two end, and they're free floating, so to say, but they're connected still to the sternum, but at the end, and you see that here on the picture, it is slightly white. That is cartilage. It's not a bone anymore. It's much more flexible. That's why you have more ability to breathe in that area. We have 12 pairs of ribs, by the way, and then it connects to the spine, and the spine connects to the pelvis. So the pelvis is that bowl which we have at the bottom of the spine, consisting of fused together bones. And we see that on the other side, on the posterior side, the sacrum. That is kind of the back side where your spine goes into the bone called sacrum, and the sacrum connects to the pelvis. So that's kind of a junction. And often we have, some people have pain. Lower back pain is often located at that area. And then if we go to the femur, that is that's on the posterior part. Okay, let's switch to the back side. We have the femur, that is the upper thigh bone, the longest bone in our body, and connects to the pelvis. And then further, we switch back to the front side. We have the patella, that is the kneecap in normal language. And we have the feet, that are 3 different bones. I mean, there are more, but let's stick to those 3: tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. And that's the same at the hands. It's called carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. So that's kind of the fingers, phalanges. Metacarpals, the parts that connect to the wrist. And then the carpals, that is the wrist bones, and they are called tarsals at the foot. So we have the tarsals and the carpals, hands and tarsals, foot, and then meta is after that. Meta is a Greek word. Metacarpals and metatarsals, 5 bones that run through the feet or through the hands. And then we have the phalanges, that's the little end parts of the fingers at the toes and the fingers, Okay, and then looking at the backside posterior, we have the spine running from the skull to the pelvis, to the sacrum. And there are vertebrae. And only at the bottom those vertebrae are fused together, and that's what we call sacrum. So in evolution they were parts, they were a tail, and they are fused together in a human. Then the femur, as we said, and then we have the tibia and fibula. The tibia is the medial bone of your shin, and the fibula is the lateral bone of your lower leg, so to say. And when we look at the arms, we find the shoulder, and in the shoulder the shoulder blade is called scapula. That's the bony part, which you can feel if you just put your fingers close to the shoulder blade, and you can move that shoulder blade, and then you can feel it probably. Then we have the upper arm bone, which is called humerus, and we have the lower arm, two bones, ulna and radius. The ulna, medial, radius, lateral. And we have those two because they are able to turn around each other. So if you straighten your arm, you can fix your upper arm and you can still turn the lower arm. It's a little bit better to feel if you go into tabletop, and you're able to turn without moving the shoulder, without moving the hand. The hand is fixed on the floor, and you're able to turn the elbow backwards and forwards, or outwards and inwards. And that is because you have two bones that can turn around each other there. Yeah. Radius, close to the thumb, and ulna, from anatomical position. This body is anatomical position, and medial. Running to the little finger. Okay, so those are the bones. And when we look now here at this slide, we can see we have, we divide the skeleton in two parts. And that is the axial skeleton, or the functions of the axial skeleton, and the appendicular skeleton. And that simply means everything that is at the axial is part of the axial skeleton. So our center, where we have support for the organs and the important organs in the body, and it allows us to stay upright. Our spine is very unique. And then, meaning the skull and the spine and the ribs and the sacrum are all axial skeleton. And then the appendicular skeleton is kind of that part which makes us move, actually. Yeah. So all walking, doing stuff, yoga is part to expressing a lot with the appendicular skeleton. It connects us to the world. Okay, and let's just name it. It's the clavicles, scapula, the shoulders, the humor, and the radius and ulna, like the arm, carpals, metacarpals, phalanges, the fingers, and the hand and the wrist, and then the pelvic girdle, or the pelvis, is appendicular, as well as the femur, patella, tibia, fibula, also the whole legs, and tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges, the feet. All right, good. Now we want to have a little look at the joints. So when two bones join together, we call that joint. And we have three types of joints. And we look at the synovial because they are the ones that actually move. And if we look at the synovial joint, then we see this structure here. That's an example for the elbow. And you have the bony part. It's spongy for a reason. Function follows form, form follows function. It has empty parts inside, so it's more light. One of the reasons why it's spongy and still very stable. So spongy bone, you can see that it is surrounded by ligaments that connecting bone to bone. So on the left side of the picture, you see it's all wrapped in ligaments, so they stay connected together. And also that we create this cavity, the joint capsule. That is the blue part, which joins both bones and gives it space within it can move. And that contains a liquid. So you can imagine it like oil for a machine that makes it more smooth to run through it. And that's, that can change its quality, so it can go more dense or more fluid. And with heat, that's why we want to warm up. It is more healthy and more movable. So that's why we normally want to move all the joints before we start an asana class, just for the case that this liquid got activated and supports movement. And then there is a kind of protection layer. It's called articular cartilage. And that is the white part that is between the bone and the liquid. And the liquid is called synovial fluid, by the way. And the cartilage, the white part, reduces the friction of the bones. So it's kind of a double safety system. There's cartilage, so it doesn't rub bone on bone. That would be not so nice and not so healthy and painful. And then we have the fluid that enables also the pressure to change and functions as a kind of oil to liquidize the movement. And also for shock absorption, when you, for example, you jump or you make a step, that you have space when the liquid goes to the side, that the cartilage is the buffering in a sense. All right, 6 different types of synovial joints. So we have many joints in the body, but they're all falling under 6 categories. And we want to go through them. Yes, let's first take this slide here, and then we go through one by one of the different synovial joints and movements they can do. Okay, how to keep joints healthy? So we want to move them, and not little, we want to move them every day. So exercising, moving, stretching, avoiding to stay stationary for too long. And while doing movement, we want to also minimize the stress. So using the muscles and muscle activation especially helps to protect the joints and the ligaments from being over exercised. So basically strengthening the muscles around the joints, but also stretching in a healthy way. That means if you stretch them actively, you want to have the muscles activated. If you stretch them passively, like in yin yoga, you want to make sure it's very gentle and very slow. Then we want to maintain a healthy weight. That is also part how to keep the joints healthy. So not too much and not too little. Both is not good, because too little means you don't have enough food, like nutrients, and you don't want to have too much weight, because that's making too much pressure. Yes. So let's go to the 6 types of joints. And in order to do that, we want to remember the 6 basic movements also. So there was flexion, extension. That was internal, external rotation. And that was abduction and adduction, right? That's a little dance party. Normally I do it with music, so you can remember better. At the bar hand dance. So basically, why I say that is the plain joints, they sit, for example, in your wrist or in the foot or in the clavicle here. And what they do is kind of, they have a surface which is plane and they glide on top of each other. And when you move your hand, yeah, like this, for example, and you sit at a bar, like the music started, that's kind of where my idea came from. You can feel like, okay, that's the plane joint that's moving. Okay, gliding movement, plane joints. Then we have the hinge joints, and they are, for example, at the humerus and ulnar, the elbow joint. And hinge, how the name already says, means like a hinge at the door. They have a movement that simply goes uniaxial back and forth. And it can do the flexion or extension, hyperextension, abduction, and that is moving your elbows. So if you have like this party style and you dance like this, then you're using your hinge joint. Next one would be the condylar joint, and that is also in the wrist. Michael Jackson's Thriller, they have their hands like this, and then I do this, and that would be the condylar joint. So it's like this picture shows a half a cup and a socket, a bowl, and that can move in it quite more or less freely. Is not as much movement as the ball and socket, which we look now, but it has movement in 4 directions. And ball and socket is one of the most movable joints we have in the body. For example, our hip or our shoulders, because it can move in all axes, all directions. Not just 2 or 1, and all 4th, and can circle around. Circumduction, all 5 movements, and it can even rotate. So it can also do rotations. Ball and socket, and as the name says, it is a socket and there's a ball that goes into it, and it can move freely there. Depends, of course, how your bone structure, like in the hip, it has a bit less movement than in the shoulder, because the bone looks different. And what comes with it is that it is less stable, because we have more freedom of movement. Okay, then you show the DJ that you really like the music, thumbs up. The movement of the thumb is the saddle joint, and you can imagine that like 2 saddles on top of each other, one like this, one like that. They join so they can go in 2 directions, and that's called a saddle joint. And last but not least, a Macarena, we have the pivot joint. Maybe you notice that, and so on. The movement of the hand, of the forearm, the radius and the ulnar, moving around each other, that is a pivot joint. So it sits at the elbow and allows the bone is held by a socket, like this, and then the bone can pivot around it. And for example, at the elbow, but also at the head, the atlas sits and can pivot on top. The atlas is a bone that connects the spine and the head. Pivot joint. So those are the 6 types of joints we have in the body. That's just a little exercise if you want to remember. Stop the video and see if you can remember and find the names. I think I have some funny, nice graphics here, which we don't need to look at now, but it's nice to figure out the movement and the joint posture or state of asanas. So if you look at any asana, you can point at any joint and say what is happening there. Here, the knee joint is in extension. Here on the leg that is in the air, the knee joint is in flexion. You look at the hip. On the left side, the hip is flexed. Well, I'm not sure if it's left or right. On the other side, the hip is extended. So you could go through asana and just figure out what is the joint doing, which kind of joint it is. So we would have, for example, the hip again, and could say that's the ball and socket joint. And it's here an extension and this, and yeah, just as an exercise. All right, and then as a last bit for this lecture, I just want to speak about a kinetic chain. There are two kinds of kinetic chains, and why do we want to know about them? Very simple, because a kinetic chain basically tells us and reminds us that the joints moving together. They are not separate in the body. So when we move one joint, we also move other joints at the same time. And that is important for asana alignment. So the kinetic chain basically says there is two kinds, an open kinetic chain and a closed kinetic chain. And as I said, a kinetic chain means joints linked together. So when I move one of them, all the others move too. If I have an open kinetic chain, that would be this example now, my arm, shoulder, elbow, hand or wrist, that would be an open kinetic chain because it's open at one end. Here, my hand has no restriction. And when I move my shoulder, the others are affected in space. But that's basically it. So they are free to move independently. And an open kinetic chain, independent movement of the others are enabled. Most of the times in asanas, we have to take care of closed kinetic chains, because then I fix my hand on one part, so I fix it here, and I fix, the other part is fixed because of my body. So now if I move my shoulder, my elbow has to move as well, because my hand is fixed, my shoulder is fixed, and the joint in between moves. So when I now tell a student to rotate the shoulder, then the elbow will rotate as well, and the wrist will rotate as well. We have to be aware of that. So if we make a correction like, please move your elbow, we know it's a close kinetic chain in that context, in that case. If I move the elbow, the shoulder will move as well. And when the shoulder moves, the wrist will move as well. So that is important to know. If you correct an asana, let's go into something when I'm standing. My feet are on the floor. That means it's a closed kinetic chain with my hip. I cannot use my hip or the feet without moving the knees. It makes total sense. Or I cannot use the knees without also moving the feet. Yeah, it's a closed kinetic chain, and if I make some adjustments, in warrior you can always have that nicely. If you have your knee and you want to correct the knee because it's kind of inward in your warrior, you move the knee, but you need to be aware you manipulating also the hip and the foot. So you need to take care of all joints in that chain. Yeah, that is the basic teaching from that kinetic chains. Joints are linked in movements. Please bear that in mind when you come here and when we work with the bodies. All right, that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed, you learned something, and we see us in the next lecture. Om.